This is a Hot Pie Media original.
State Rep Donna Howard has served in the Texas House since 2006. She is a member of the House Appropriations Committee and State Affairs Committee. Native Austinite, she represents District 48. She's with me now. Representative Howard, can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Great. Let's talk about big picture macro issues at the political level. And I'll try to set this up. I think you would have a good take on this. So the average person doesn't pay attention to the minutia of everyday politics. They've got a life, they're functioning, they're doing normal things, but they hear. Here we go. We have another special session. I just railed on everyone at the Capitol for it costing $43,330 a day. So they hear this stuff and they're thinking, okay, this whole thing is about whatever culture war of the day is. And this is a person in Austin or Dallas or Houston or San Antonio saying, I don't get it. These major metro areas are where life is happening, where people are moving. It's a booming economy. Why is it these things keep coming up? Why is it they keep getting voted in? And I guess more directly, why is it if you're representing a major metro area, why is it the people that represent major metro areas keep losing?
Good questions, Jeff. Elections matter. That's my answer to just about everything you just said. If you go back the session before last, after the 2018 election, when in the House anyway, we elected 12 additional Democrats, which shifted the balance to where obviously the Democrats were still in the minority, but certainly had more of a potential to build coalitions and compromise. And the Republicans who ran that session, that election cycle, got the message that people were tired, as you point out, of the culture wars that were going on and wanted us to get back down to the business of kitchen table issues, public education in particular, and property taxes. And we did that session in 2019. We actually did not get sidetracked with wedge issues. We put $11 billion more into public education, $6 billion directly into education, $5 billion into a property tax reduction that the state was going to cover the difference there. We accomplished that. Then fast forward to the 2020 elections, and it was a whole different ballgame because after a pretty brutal campaign season when everybody, both Democrats and Republicans, thought that the Democrats were poised to gain more seats, as you well know, that did not happen. So we came into the 21st session with exactly the same breakdown, 67 Democrats, 83 Republicans, exactly the same as we had in 2019, but with a contentious campaign cycle and a sense of, wow, you put us through the ringer here for something that we didn't need to go through. We now have, we think, a mandate to go back to doing the social cultural wedge issues. And we're going to push you up against the wall on this stuff. And that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, right. But if somebody just doing the simple math would say, man, it just seems like small town Texas matters much more than major metro Texas.
Well, and, you know, in a sense, there is still that holding on to the rural representation, which has been really a stronghold for the Republican Party. And I think for traditionally what some people think is definitive of Texas. And we still have, through previous gerrymandered redistricting sessions, we still have representation occurring in areas that have lost population. That certainly is poised to change at this point in time. But with the Republicans in charge and what we've already seen come out of the Senate, it looks like, despite the fact that the census data had 95% of our growth being in minorities, the growth of what the Senate is proposing is going to be in a more white Republican area than in the urban minority and suburban areas. So, you know, there's a lot to talk about here, but, you know, certainly.
I'm making an observation. I think the average person is saying, I'm trying to pay attention, man. It just, none of this stuff just adds up to me. I mean, I don't mean I don't mean to be completely dismissive that some of these social issues don't matter to people.
Right.
But in the grand scheme of things, you are going to have another special session over something that 99.99 and put a bunch of nines after it, transgendered athletes.
Yes.
Is not a thing. So no. I assume you don't think we should have a special session, correct?
Oh,
or
correct.
should we have one?
Obviously, we need one on redistricting. We need one on redistricting. We need one to ensure that the legislature is involved with how we spend $16 billion of federal funds, which the governor promised us we would have some say in this time, which he prevented us from having a say in the last tranche of funds that came through. But that was the only one we needed to have. All the previous two special sessions we shouldn't have had. And I even am even hearing rumors now of a potential fourth special session.
Right. But somebody, again, just a casual observer, which most voters are, would say, okay, Representative Howard, this guy's asking these common sense questions. You're saying this is a waste of time, and you're giving these detailed answers about redistricting. Then they would say, well, gosh, but you left the state. I mean, the very chance to interact and fight and do all the things you're arguing, you're one of those people that left the state. And how did that work out for me?
Right.
Fair point, though, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yes. And to your point, Jeff, I will say that all of us are well aware of the fact that if we do not pass what the governor wants, then we will be in special session. That's a given because he's the only one that can call us into special session. Right. We can't call ourselves into special session. He controls the agenda. And as we've seen, he has an agenda that he is using for his potential primary and presidential elections. That being said, yes, I left. And I'll give you as brief a reason for why that all happened as I can. The end of the regular session, end of May, 11th hour, we were given from the Senate the new voting bill, which some of us would say a voting suppression bill, but the new voting bill, however you wanted to frame it. We had in the House already worked on compromises. We worked on putting things in that would be more palatable, taking things out that were less palatable, but still not something that the Democrats were going to vote for, but they weren't going to leave town for. We sent this, we worked hard, negotiated, sent it to the Senate. 11th hour, Senate sends us back a bill that stripped all of those provisions that we had worked on, that had no opportunity for public input, no opportunity for debate. Democrats went to the back mic to ask questions of the author, couldn't answer the questions, refused to answer the questions. We were pushed up against the wall, getting ready to pass something that after that session ended, the Republicans disavowed what was in that bill. They did not even know what the Senate had sent up. We were about to pass something that was going to allow elections to be overturned without proof of fraud. I mean, it was an egregious bill. You
Democrats knew, no offense, you knew you were going to lose. You're not going to get what you want. You knew that. So you knew that going in. And so how is the net result, knowing you're going to lose anyway, how is the net result on your agenda or arguing or making the case that this was, I think most sensible people know that there's not voting fraud. It doesn't exist, not happening, zero. It's a made up issue. Would you not have been better served losing, which you're going to lose whether you stay or leave? Would you not have been better served in the long term to stand around and argue and grab a microphone and jump on talk shows and say, this is BS, this sucks, they undercut us, but I'm going to talk about it? Would you not have been better served with that?
And I think that's going to be something we're going to have to look back on and talk about at some point in time and see what really might have happened otherwise. The reason it happened the way it did, though, is because we knew clearly we weren't going to lose. I mean, we weren't going to win ever. This was going to happen. It was going to be special sessions. It was going to happen. What we also knew, though, is that this was about the very basis of our democracy, the right to vote. And that if we were going to take a stand on anything, that was going to be the thing we would take a stand on. We also knew that Congress was considering legislation that would preempt what the Texas legislature was doing. We knew that if we could at least stall enough to where Congress would take action that we could potentially get the outcome that we wanted. You've got to understand.
What was it? By the way, so was the outcome, what would have been the favorable outcome? I mean, obviously you didn't want the quote voting integrity bill to pass at all, but what would have been a favorable outcome? Where would have ended had things gone your way?
The favorable outcome would have been if Congress would have gone ahead and passed the legislation that they were considering. And they actually did when we went to Washington and we met with a bunch of senators and with the vice president herself. They did speed up what they were doing. They did bring it to the front burner. They did. It raised the consciousness level of what was going on. There were promises of taking things up, but the sticking point there, and I can't speak to how Congress works exactly, but the fact is that the filibuster was a big issue and prevented this from being from actually being voted on. There were efforts to try to change how that procedure might happen. So the outcome we wanted was that they would have addressed this in whatever way they needed to, change the filibuster rules, whatever they needed to do, push that legislation through, get it passed, and get it passed this summer, at fall at the latest, so that we would be able to prevent the implementation of the Texas legislature's bill. That was the outcome that we would have wanted. It did not happen that way. There's still potential. For this to happen, but it hasn't.
But if your handicap, your armchair quarterback, your decision to leave, the selfies, the mask, all that stuff that Fox News hates you alive for, as you well know.
Right.
And a lot of people of every political stripe were critical. Armchair quarterbacking, if you say it now, was it a pretty good idea, or you'd say, maybe not?
I think you could probably argue both sides of that.
I know, but how would you
clearly,
how would you handicap it now? Do you wish you had not have done that?
No, I do not wish that. I do not wish that. I do believe it was important that we went and that we stood up for our democracy, and I think that's what we did do. And I think we pushed things further than they ever would have gone otherwise. And I hope it'll get to the finish line. Now, the things that passed in the special sessions that I was extremely opposed to, yes, I do not like that at all. I wish that hadn't happened. And I realized that part of that is a result of what we chose to do. I get that. Yeah. Let me just say, though, in regard to, because I think it's important with all going on with COVID, when we left, the Delta variant had just started showing up. Nobody really knew what was going on. We were following CDC guidelines. Everything we did followed CDC guidelines, even not wearing masks on a private plane, which followed CDC guidelines. So once things started to change, and they changed rapidly, unfortunately, we took immediate action and hopefully prevented any spread by isolating, by requiring daily tests, by masking, by working with the leadership here in Texas that works in the public health arena. And so, we took this responsibly. It's unfortunate.
But you would admit, I mean, all that said, you would admit it had to be a bad look. Right?
Oh, yeah. That's what I just said. Yeah, the optics were horrible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. This voting integrity, I think the actual term of the voting bill, I think it's voting integrity, something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
So you said we're arguing semantics here, but semantics may matter a lot, it seems like. You say voter suppression. I mean, technically, it's really just making voting less convenient, right? I mean, no one's vote is being ripped away from them, but it's just being made to be a pain in the butt to get there and do it. Does it help or hurt your cause, or make the argument of the term suppression? Because it's pretty dramatic. I mean, I wonder if your argument back isn't hurt by using pretty dramatic terms like suppression, or maybe you're going to argue, hey, it fits. So let me hear that case.
Okay. Yeah, words do matter, and messaging matters. Maybe there would be a better term, but having traveled this road with the likes of Representative Senfronia Thompson, who is 82, and who actually was subjected to the poll tax herself, and to hear the stories of how she and people in her community are actually discouraged from going to the polls, how they are intimidated and bullied. The thing with poll watchers being able to have greater freedom within the voting arena to be able to watch what you're doing.
Is that what you mean by bullied? I mean, explain when you say, again, something pretty dramatic like they're bullied, what form does that take? Hey, every guy can relate to this. You're tired of wearing those baggy cotton shirts that feel like you're wearing curtains. There's a difference. In fact, I'm wearing the difference. That is the ultra premium basics from goodlifeclothing.com. You'll love the shirts. I've been searching for a long time, like every guy, for the perfect lightweight shirt that looks good if you're in pretty good shape. It's at goodlifeclothing.com. Check them out. You'll see the difference for yourself. You'll feel the difference for yourself. It's the perfect shirt for this time of year in Austin, Texas. So, two things. Go to goodlifeclothing.com. You get a 20% discount if you enter the promo code JeffWard20. That's goodlifeclothing.com. Enter the promo code JeffWard20 or stop by their store domain Northside. You'll love the difference. You'll feel the difference. It's the perfect fit for a guy that's in good shape. It's goodlifeclothing.com, promo code JeffWard20, or stop by their brand new store at Domain Northside.
The fact she actually had stories, as did others, of experiences in the past where people intimidated her and family members and community members in terms of whether or not they were qualified to be voting, demanding certain identifications that intimidated folks. I mean, all I can say is this has not happened to me. I'm talking about what I hear from my colleagues. But the bottom line is with poll watchers that we were just talking about is they are allowed to be right next to you while you're voting, right next to you. And let's just say it's a taller person than you. They can actually stand over you and see what you're doing. I think that's intimidating. I think that's bullying to allow somebody to be having people watch what goes on in elections is important. We have to have that. We must have transparency in voting, but we don't need somebody standing over our shoulder and being able to see what we're doing. We don't need people to be intimidated from picking up a neighbor and taking them to the polls, because now if you haven't signed some oath or you're afraid that somebody could misconstrue what you're doing, you could be held criminally liable for bringing your neighbor to the polls. I mean, it makes things, yes, you're right. It's creating barriers. It makes it more difficult, but it also intimidates people from doing things.
So your fear of these poll watchers, because I think people hear the term and we don't even know exactly what that looks like. Yeah. So in the near future, the bill will pass. How does one become a poll watcher, and what's your fear other than there's some big tall person staring over your shoulder? What is the ugliness of these poll watchers that you're so concerned about?
You know, when you look at the way that this was put together, it was.
By the way, how do you become a poll watcher? Like, what is that?
Well, you just decide you want to be one, and you can just apply to be a poll watcher, and you get some kind of a document that says these are the rules you're supposed to follow. But then you just show up.
Okay.
And the election officials that are there can monitor what you're doing, but they have to actually see you do something. Nobody can report that the poll watcher has intimidated them. The election official has to see them do it. And then they originally the way it was worded is you can give them a warning, but they can do it again as long because you can't actually remove them until you've warned them. It's a complicated. It's been made more complicated than it needs to be.
So conceivably, could I run against Donna Howard and call up a bunch of buddies?
If you live in my district, yes.
Yeah. So I run against Donna Howard. And I call up a bunch of buddies, or I have a lunch fundraiser or whatever. And I say, hey, look, Bob, Freddie, Billy Joe, I want all you guys to be poll watchers. Go sign up and do it, and then go to that. Whatever West Austin little elementary school where they vote, I want you to hang around there. I mean, is that? Do you think that's what's going to happen? That somebody would use it as gather people up, send them places as a form of intimidation?
It's possible. I don't know if it would happen or not, but certainly it's possible. And I think in today's climate, where we see We see the situations occurring where people, parents coming to the school board meetings and having all of the contention there, ripping a mask off of a teacher's face, kind of thing. You see what happened with January 6th, and I got to tell you, on a side note, when I was at the Capitol and visiting senators, I got to visit Sherrod Brown, Senator Sherrod Brown's office. It was astounding, and I just was emotional. Sitting in his office, looking out the window, it was the exact window that had been broken by the insurrectionists who broke into our Capitol, stormed into our Capitol. And he had pictures of that to juxtapose from what I was actually looking at. The fact that we have these kinds of behaviors happening now, I don't think it's far-fetched to think that people would go to whatever limit they can in terms of creating these kinds of disruptions. I think that's what we've been seeing.
So the poll watcher, not the poll watcher, the election representative, and bless those people. They
bless them is right.
That is a thankless, awful job. So they're now their task is now, if they need to, they can say, look, hey, back away from her, get over in the corner. So they're actually in charge of maneuvering the people and the poll watchers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and these are typically, as you I think you're pointing out, a lot of retired women in particular, and men, but a lot of retired women who, they're being put in a very difficult position.
Okay. Greg Abbott wants to be president, you think?
I think there's a lot of people that would suggest that's the case.
Do you think so?
If I were a betting person, I probably would say yes.
Yeah. And Beto O'Rourke is going to run against him?
The latest report seemed to be that he's inching that direction, but I have not heard anything definitive at this point.
So how, with the, quote, changing demographics, although there's a good Texas Monthly story about how Democrats are losing South Texas Hispanics, which is kind of a fascinating story, which is a very realistic issue that people don't think about. Your party certainly does. How does Beto O'Rourke beat Greg Abbott?
I am not, despite being a longtime politician, I am not a political strategist. I'm a policy person. That's where my focus is. So I always have a hard time really coming up with these kinds of answers. But the best I can do is to say that right now, with what's been going on at the legislature, with the infringement on our constitutional rights to vote, our constitutional rights to have an abortion before viability, and having the courts actually just turn their heads and say that's going to be implemented. We'll deal with the legal parts later. Permitless carry. I know some of your listeners would probably think that's a great thing, but the fact is that does put off a lot of suburban moms to have permitless carry going on. The fact that we're attacking trans youth. The list goes on in terms of things that have happened recently. There are people who would identify as Republican, but certainly identify as independents, especially in our suburban areas, that are going to take a second look here at Abbott and think, wow, I thought this was a reasonable guy. He has really gone off the deep end.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look
at somebody else.
You've been in office since 2006. How much, to judge him, how different is he politically than he was 6 or 8 years ago? Hell, how different is he than he was 2 years ago?
Well, we don't, I think, have the same kind of history in that his political positions were not legislative, so it's harder to to compare that. But I think he's always kind of demonstrated that he was going to go after a lot of social issues in terms of when he was the AG, getting up every morning, suing the federal government and going back home comments. Clearly he was positioning himself in that direction. But there's never been this kind of unreasonableness that I would describe it, where, even during the first part of COVID, he got a lot of criticisms from both Democrats and Republicans for what he was doing, but he was at least listening to the science and trying to do what was important to ensure the health and safety of Texans. And even though it was difficult, and even though people were very critical of certain shutdowns of businesses, in the long run, that was going to allow us to open back up more quickly. And then, of course, we get to this segment of COVID, and he has totally gone on a different direction than he did before and dug his heels in about not taking the same kind of public health policy actions that have been recommended by the scientific community. And so I think, yes, he has changed to a certain extent. You know, I think that's clear. The
COVID is a good jumping off point. So I don't know how long you were critical care nurse, right?
Yes.
For
a long time ago.
Okay. So I would assume this all has special meaning to you. So I don't know which part of you is Donna Howard, the politician, and which part of you is now going to be Donna Howard, the medical professional. But you've got expertise, more so than anyone else. Policy-wise on COVID, let's just start with vaccines. What do you think would be a practical policy on vaccines?
You know, I'm going to put this out there. We already have vaccines that are required. And we already have exceptions to taking those vaccines. We have exemptions in place in the law. That has served us well in terms of, I'm old enough that I remember getting the first polio vaccine.
Right.
My uncle was in an iron lung for a year with polio. We're not dealing with polio now because of required vaccines. Same with measles and others, except where we've had breakouts where people have not vaccinated. So in terms of COVID, I still think that there is a reasonable pathway to saying that we need to have this be a vaccine that everyone takes in order to protect the larger public good, but also provide opportunities for exemptions so that people who, right now in Texas, even though I would not want this, it's the law, and I would support doing it with COVID as well. That is, not only do you have exemptions for medical reasons, but for conscious reasons of conscience. Sure. People can say, I don't want to take it.
So you would have, if you could wave a magic wand in the Capitol, you would say this. At what time would you have said we needed to implement this as a vax policy and put it on the same category as everything else that our kids are vaccinated for? When would you have suggested that we do that, or would you suggest we do that now and leave it there going forward? And that's the way COVID is going to be a vaccine for years to come. And when would you have suggested we do that?
You know, I don't have a particular date in mind. I do wish we could have had more discussion over the.
Has that discussion taken place at the Capitol at all?
No,
not at all.
No.
Why?
No, because the majority of the representatives here are going to be opposed to that, and they're not talking about it. I mean, it's just not happening.
If you walked in and said, "Hey, everybody, don't talk to me as Donna Howard, representative. Talk to me as Donna Howard, the medical professional. I'm here to tell you, make the argument you just made about polio." I mean, which is odd. I just read an interesting story about when the polio vaccine was introduced. People were roundly thrilled about it. It was like a celebration.
Oh, yes.
It's so odd to compare the times, but. You walk in and you say, I just need all of you to listen to me. You don't want your constituents to die. We don't want our economy to crater. You make all the medical arguments. What would have been said had you just made the exact same argument you're making now? What would you hear back?
Well, we actually have a piece of legislation that's already been filed for this special session that will eliminate all required vaccines. So that's what I would be getting back at me. Well, no, we don't want to mandate this, and we want to get rid of everything else.
Wait, there's a bill. There would be no vaccines?
No required vaccines, no mandated vaccines. Everything that we require right now for children to go to school, for children to go to childcare, for college students to go into the university, no longer would those be in the law.
Didn't we just, I know this because I have kids, but didn't we just have the meningitis vaccine was approved and required just within the last few years? So that'd be wiped out too?
Yes. So this is the the extreme response, and I don't think that the majority are going to go along with that.
Yeah.
But to go back to where we were talking at the beginning about elections matter, you know that the primary elections are where a lot of the action really takes place. And that's where fewer people turn out to vote. And the people who do turn out to vote are basically, with the Democrats and the Republicans, more of our base voters who are more extreme in views.
Sure.
And so the concern is always, among my Republican colleagues in particular, making sure that they don't go too far away from the base and the far right of the party, because then they potentially will lose in the primary. And right now, the voices of the Republican platform, the voices of our governor, the voices of the people running against him, all indicate that we do not need these vaccines to be mandated. And in fact, we don't even agree that with all the science that's out there. So pushback, yeah, extreme.
If you were to put it out there just as a poll and say, hey, this is from Donna Howard, the medical professional, do you agree that there's no letter next to your name, so there's not the built-in bias either way? Do you believe that a COVID vaccine should be mandated as other vaccines? What percentage of the public would say yes, right on?
Wow. I don't know, but the fact that we finally are getting to a point of having about 50% vaccinated, astoundingly low number from where it should be, makes me think that there would not be a majority.
Really?
Well, I don't know. I haven't done that poll.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's taken us so long to even get to 50% being vaccinated, there's a lot of resistance out there.
The concern about the safety of the vax and the process the vax went through, do you see some argument in there? I mean, it was fast-tracked, although then again, it was approved like everything else, as you know. But did you see some argument in there and concerns about safety? I mean,
I don't have concerns about it. I believe that the way it was done, yes, it was fast-tracked. And by fast-track, that meant that all the things that needed to be done were done more quickly than they normally would be with the bureaucratic red tape that normally goes on. So, yes, it was fast-tracked, but it was not fast-tracked in a way that left room for error. It was still following all the criteria that needed to be met. It was just done in a quicker term than normally happens. So, yes, I understand how that appears, and I understand how somebody would say, that was, I'm not going to do that. I get that, but from my vantage point, I'm not concerned about that.
Okay, fair enough. Representative Howard, thanks for doing this. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
From the Hot Pie Media Studios in Austin, Texas, it's the Jeff Ward Show. Listen at jeffwardshow.com.